Howdy folks. I figured I'd go ahead and start up with my food labs that I used to do a while back and go over the proteins that I add to my dehydrated trail food. With that being said, it is a lot more cost effective than spending $10 on a mountain house or something along those lines. And back in 2012 when I did my AT thru hike attempt, this is what I used to do. I used to dehydrate all my own proteins and then I would add them to North Sides or ramen noodles, and that would usually cost like $2 to $3 per meal versus $10 a meal. With that being said, if you've ever dehydrated beef and turkey before, you'll notice when they say turkey and beef gravel, it is gravel. It tastes really bad. So what I've tried to do over the course of years, I've played around with it, used some tips and tricks that I've acquired over the course of time, and I've put it into my own little way of doing things. So I hope this helps you out. This is something that, as I said, it's kind of something that's been trial and error over the course of the years, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. If you have actually tried something and something that I'm not doing here that you found it works great, please leave a comment down below because I would like to learn off of you just as well as everybody else does too. So what I have done is I've got 93.7 lean ground beef. I've got some 93.7 lean ground turkey. I've got some chicken breast itself. And then I've got some shrimp. I've actually selected the salad shrimp that are already pre-cooked. But that being said, you could obviously use any other type of shrimp you want. You just have to cut them into smaller pieces. I try to keep it somewhat bland and neutral. When I say that is because that way I can add it to any other meal. You could obviously doctor these up and change them to meet your specific needs. One thing that I have learned over the course of time is if I dehydrate the meats at a higher temperature and do a few of the tips and techniques that I'll show you here, they seem to come out better when I add them to other things that I actually dehydrate at a much lower temperature, such as vegetables, pastas, and things along those lines. So that's why I kind of do this separate, and it seems to work out a lot better for me anyway. So without further ado, let's get into this. All right, first thing is first. What I like to do is take the lean ground beef that I've got here, and I'm going to go ahead and add some of these breadcrumbs that I've actually done previously. I went ahead, I don't typically like to use the breadcrumbs that come out of the can itself, because what they do is they typically have a little bit finer texture. So what I do is I take some French bread, I put it in the food processor, mash and beat that up a little bit until I get these breadcrumbs here. What I do is when I put this in here, what this actually does is get between the little fibers of the meat. And when you reconstitute it, it seems to go ahead and rehydrate a lot better. So what I do is I don't use a whole heck of a lot. Depends on what I'm using. And I kind of eyeball it here. But I give it a good amount. I'd say about a half a cup per pound of meat maybe. And then what I also do is I like to use some beef broth. Now this beef broth is going to add a little bit of moisture so that way I can incorporate it a little bit better and give it a little bit of flavor. Now like I said, I'm not going to use a whole lot, just a little bit. And since this is pretty much the only time that I'm going to have the impart flavor into this beef, keeping it neutral, like I said, add to anything else. I add just a dash of salt to it. And the reason I don't go overboard with that is because I'm going to go ahead and add some kikkoman soy sauce. I like to add this because it adds a little bit of flavor in my opinion. So about a tablespoon of that. And then I like mine peppery, so I add quite a bit of pepper to it. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get in here. I'm going to mix this up and try to incorporate as much of that breadcrumb as I possibly can into the meat. Now, unlike something like a meatball or something like that, you're not going to worry too much about over mashing this, because once we get it into the frying pan, we're going to go ahead and get this all crumbled up nice and small so it actually works a little better into the meat. I'm actually going to add a little bit more breadcrumbs in here. And maybe just a tad bit more beef broth. I don't have really exact measurements for this because it's kind of all by feel, and you kind of have to play with it. Don't worry about it getting it too moist, just for the simple fact that when you put it in the dehydrator, it's going to go ahead and dry it out anyway. So this is just more to incorporate and give some flavor into the meat itself. All right, and that's just as simple as that for the ground beef. Let's go ahead and move on to the turkey. Now with the ground turkey, we're going to basically do something very similar to what we did with the ground beef. As I said, this is not rocket science, people here. This is pretty simple. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and add some more of the breadcrumbs that I created earlier. And I found that you don't quite need as much in the ground turkey as you do the ground beef. What I also do is I add some chicken stock Get them out of that there to kind of loosen it all up. Going back to the black pepper again. I like black pepper, so obviously adjust that according to what you like. And then finally, I like to add some seasoned salt. Not a whole lot of this. This kind of gets a little crazy if you do use too much. And with that being said, we're just going to go ahead and get in here and do the same thing we did before. Mix that all up, make sure it's thoroughly incorporated, all those breadcrumbs in there. And I think maybe just a wee bit more. And so it's all kind of by eye. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get the meat just to have enough in between it that it's gonna, you know, when you go ahead and rehydrate it, it's gonna suck that water into it and actually separate those particles just a little bit more, meat fibers. But not so much that it's just overly doughy. So I think that's pretty good right there. All right, with that being said, we're gonna move over to the stove and we're gonna start getting some of the stuff ready for the dehydrator. All right, over at the stove here, I got a non-stick pan. I'm gonna use a very light spraying of this just so I don't damage my pan for the most part. Not really so much so it doesn't stick, that's why I'm using a non-stick pan. With that being said, I'm gonna turn this to about medium to high heat. The reason for that is if I go with a high heat like you normally would do ground beef, it's going to burn the breadcrumbs. So what I'm going to do is just lightly get that going. Let that come up to temperature here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the meat to it. All right, now that I got a little heat in the pan there, I'm going to go ahead and get some of this beef in. And you hear that starting to sizzle. With that being said, we don't want to get the heat too hot on this because we don't want to burn those breadcrumbs. Make sure you break this up continuously throughout. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get this all cooked through, but also as small as possible as far as little granules go while it's in the pan. This way when you go ahead and dehydrate it, it'll dehydrate uniformly. We're getting just about to the end of this here. And I've been kind of doing this the entire time, just kind of bashing it up to make sure it stays in small little clumps here. We don't want those big clumps. And we're gonna get this, make sure it's well done. The reason for that is you don't want to have to worry about getting any salmonella or anything like that, or any kind of funky diseases from rotten meat. Now, when we dehydrate it, we're going to dehydrate it at the highest setting on the food dehydrator, which on mine is about 155. Some go up to 165, some lower than that. Either way, it's going to cook the meat, and that's why I do these separately from things like vegetables, because I've noticed everything else seems to dehydrate much better at a lower temperature, and you don't lose as much nutrients that way because you're not actually overcooking the food. So what we're going to do now is, now that this is pretty much close to done, we're going to move over to the sink. Alright, so you can see the steam coming off that, and what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and get the ground beef in here, and I want that as hot as possible, because what I want to do is I want to rinse any excess grease that might possibly be on this. Now I'm just going to give this a quick rinse, because I don't want to wash all the flavor off of it and soak up any more water into those breadcrumbs. But I do want to make sure I hit it now. With that being said, I'm also going to go ahead and use this little sprayer nozzle here. Give it a quick hit. And do that a few more times. Get that grease off of there. Now with lean beef this lean, if not even leaner, if you get the 97.3, I guess you can get that is probably the extreme, but you're going to get into a little bit higher price point with that. That's pretty much it. I'm going to give it a little taste. That is perfect. That's going to be good. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this on a plate with some paper towels, let it dry off a little bit, and then I'm going to move on to the turkey. Questions over the course of time as to what kind of dehydrator I use. I use an open country adventure campwear that I bought probably about 12 to 13 years ago from Bass Pro Shops. I want to say it was like 40 bucks when I bought it. With that being said, that's the dehydrator I used. Used it for years and it served me well. Now what I have is I've taken the bottom here and the bottom tray, and I've gone ahead and inserted one of these plastic trays in there. That way if anything falls through, it's going to catch on that. And then I've gone ahead and spread out the ground beef onto one tray. You don't have to go too awful thin, because every 2 hours I'm going to come back into this and go ahead and move it around a little bit just to make sure that it's dehydrating uniformly, and it's going to shrink quite a bit. So that what you see on that tray right there is going to be considerably a lot less by the time I'm done with this. I also went ahead and started on the next tray, which is going to be half ground beef, that's what I can fit, and ground turkey, and then another rack of ground turkey. I'm going to go ahead and place another one of the dehydrator trays over top of this with a plastic tray, and we're going to go ahead and get started on the chicken. Right, moving on to the chicken. So what I'm going to do here is I've actually got cold water in here, and I'm going to go ahead and start to hit that with some heat. What I'm going to do to that is I'm going to add a tablespoon of salt and a tablespoon of peppercorns approximately. So I said this is the only time that I really have to impart flavor in this piece of chicken. And I'm going to add some lemon. Now you don't have to do the lemon obviously, or if you don't like it. The reason I do that is because when I cook my chicken at home, I actually bake it in the oven and I put some lemon slices on top of it to get a little flavor to it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the chicken in there. Now the reason I'm doing it from the cold and bringing it up to a boil is I want that chicken to kind of start cooking evenly. It takes anywhere between 15-25 minutes depending on where you live at, the humidity, elevation, all that kind of good stuff from my experience. When I lived on the East Coast, it only took me about 15 minutes to go ahead and boil a chicken. That's actually a pretty big chicken breast, so I'm assuming that's probably going to take about 20 minutes. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and throw the lid on it, and we're going to bring that up to a boil. So we've been going about 20 minutes now. If you don't already have one, I highly recommend you get one of these. It is a food thermometer. That way you don't have to worry about taking out raw chicken. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and take this out. And I'm going to tent this with some tin foil. I'm going to let that sit probably for about a good half hour. Unless you got asbestos fingers, I would recommend letting that cool off before you start to shred it. Well, I know this is still going to be hot, but I'm an impatient type of guy. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to take tongs here to hold it, and I'm just going to start shredding the meat. And basically I'm just trying to get this as stringy as possible. I don't want any big chunks. And just take your time with it. And there we have it. So unlike the ground beef and the ground turkey, I'm going to spread this a little bit thinner on here, only because, you know, chicken like this, I don't want to take any chances with. I don't think I'll have any problems, only because I've done this before and I've never had an issue. But I always like to do this one just a little bit thinner than the other one. So this is probably going to take up 2 trays. A little bit more air in there, and I'll just make sure I check on it to make sure that it dehydrates well. Break up any big chunks that you might have on there. I think I did a pretty good job of going ahead and getting that thinned out. So now that everything's said and done, I'm going to go ahead and put the dehydrator on here. I'm going to go ahead and set this to the 155, or the highest temperature rating, and let that go. I'm going to check that every 2 hours and make sure that everything is dehydrating evenly. I'm going to go ahead and spread it out if I need to, and we'll check in a little while. So after 6 hours, it's set at 155. We have now got a bunch of gravel. I rotated this once actually, 3 hours into the process. Took the top 3 trays off and moved them around, and you can see that we've got pretty dry stuff here. Now I will say this is going to rehydrate much better than you would if you just did it straight up beef. So you got the beef, you can see what the difference is here. Get that close to you. And then there's the turkey. And then down below that, we've got the chicken. As I said, it's all really dry, all ready to go. Let's get on to the shrimp. Alright, just the opposite of what I did with the chicken. This time I want to go ahead and I want to have a rolling boil. So I'm going to go ahead and add the lemon, some salt, and some black peppercorns again. Flare that up. Let that go for a second or so. And let's see here, we'll stir that around just to make sure we get some of that juice in there. And the only thing I'm really doing here is I want to blanch this and impart some more flavor to it. Go ahead and drop the shrimp in. And I'm only going to let that go for about 2 minutes. And opposite of what we did with the turkey and the beef, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and quickly drain this. And I'm going to hit this with cold water instead of hot water. The reason for that is I want to actually stop the cooking process. As I said, it was just to impart a little bit of flavor in there. And get rid of that lemon. And we're going to let these cool off. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to do these until after I've dehydrated the chicken, turkey, and ground beef, because I'm going to dehydrate this at a lower temperature. So I got the shrimp. I'm going to go ahead and spread these out pretty evenly. Once again, I'm using the perforated sheets, not using the solid ones. And this one I'm going to set at 135. So I'm going to cook this at a lower temperature, or dehydrate it at a lower temperature. And let that go probably about 4 hours. So it took about 2.5 hours. And you can see that these little tiny things have dried all the way up now. So I'm going to go ahead and bag all this stuff up, and we'll wrap it up. Well, there you have it, folks. Like I said, it wasn't rocket science. I did this back in 2012 for my AT thru hike attempt, and basically did a big, huge batch of this stuff here, and went ahead and mixed it in with some nor and ramen noodles. So saved me quite a bit of money. $10 comparatively speaking for Mountain House meals, which I did use, but you're talking $2 to $3 per meal for this combination with those cheap alternatives. If you found any information in this video that you found useful, please consider subscribing to the channel, maybe even hit that like button. Also, if you have any tips or tricks yourself, put them in the comments. I would love to see what you have that you come up with yourself. So until next time, guys, get out and enjoy some nature. Get out and hike. Take care. Now, before you start any of your cooking today, make sure you have a good quality assurance tester here. Also, somebody that picks up anything that you drop on the floor during the process. Right, Sophie? Yes, you will.